Hello and welcome to the University of Southampton Student Union's European Elections Hustings. So for those of you who may be here and don't realise, May the 6th is the deadline for you to register to vote. And I guess some of you might also be thinking, why should I vote? And hopefully some of the candidates that are sat across the stage, they'll have a chance to both explain what their party's for, explain what their party stands for, and then answer some of your questions will hopefully ignite that fire within you for democracy. So, why the EU? It's responsible for 15 to 50% of all UK legislation, including things such as international trade, the environment, agriculture, workers' rights, and much more than this. A major part of the European Union is the European Parliament, which we have some standing members with us on the stage, and many standing for it today, and those representing their parties. It's elected by all EU citizens, including any of you out there who are EU who are watching us back. Go to aboutmyvote.co.uk if you're any of our international students who aren't sure if you were eligible before or not. You probably are, so find out. And there are registration forms at the front on the desk for the end of this session, or if not, you can print one out online and bring it to the Student Union and we will post it for you. It has the power to approve, amend or reject new European laws. It also approves the EU budget and new members of the European Commission. It's currently made up of 766 members from 28 EU member countries. Currently, the UK is represented by 73 MEPs, so we are very lucky to have two on the stage with us. There are 12 European electoral regions, and each is represented between 3 and 10 MEPs, depending on the size and the kind of density of population. It depends. For 1 month a week, they go to Strasbourg and debate and vote on new European laws with other MEPs from other European countries. So that's enough to explain a little bit about Europe, and hopefully some of the other candidates will cover this. But I will just start by introducing our first speaker, who is from the Liberal Democrats. Catherine is one of 2 Liberal Democrat MEPs that represent the South East region in the European Parliament. She is a member of the Parliament's Committee on Regional Development, Committee on International Trade, and substitute member of the Transport Committee. She is also a member of the Parliament's delegation to join the Parliamentary Assembly between the AU and the ACP, which stands for Africa, Caribbean and Pacific Regions, which requires working with representatives from some of the poorest countries on the planet. So I'd like to introduce Catherine to speak.
It's live, yes, it's live, and we've got 5 minutes, so good. Okay, well, thank you so much for inviting me here today to talk to you, and it's always a pleasure to come and talk to young people. I'm no longer a young person, but I was one once, and I know that in your hands is the future. We have a problem with European elections. What we should be doing in the European elections is talking about me as a candidate, what I'm here to offer you, the sorts of things that I'm interested in, the environment, stopping the trafficking of human beings, and making sure that legislation in the European Parliament fits the UK and in particular the South East region. However, we always end up in the European elections talking about, should we be in Europe, should we be out of Europe? Do we like Europe, do we not like them? And when I say Europe, I mean the European Union, because there's an awful lot more to Europe than the EU. So we end up in this cycle. We never do this for Westminster. When come the general election, and you'll have next year candidates come before you, they'll talk about the issues that they care about, the issues that you care about, and how we're going to solve those problems. So just very briefly, I'm going to tell you about me. I'm a mum, I am a wife, I'm a sister, an auntie. I've worked in the community organisations. I used to run a Citizens Advice Bureau, I work for victim support, and community organisations in Oxfordshire where I live. But I am really driven by my concern about what is happening to the environment. And when I say the environment, I mean the natural environment, biodiversity loss that is happening in Europe and is happening around the world. The environment is the big driver for me. I have another issue, and that's trafficking of human beings, and those 2 issues can only be done cross-party, cross-country. They are international crimes, they are international issues, and we need to be working with our partners in Europe to do that. So that's where I spend a lot of my time, as you've heard, with the African countries on ivory poaching and all sorts of issues, from whether it's protecting bees in the southeast region or elephants in Africa and everything in between. Making sure that legislation fits us here in the UK. And that's where I'm just going to come back to why the EU. Why should we be in the EU? Because you might have heard that the Lib Dems are the only party that is clearly stating that we should remain as active members of the European Union. We have to be in Europe because Europe is where our economic security comes from. It's where our jobs are protected. It's where our environment is protected. It's where our security is protected. The European Union, if we left the European Union, would continue. It would still be there, it would still continue. But without British influence, it would become a different European Union. We have, as you say, the third largest number of MEPs in the Parliament, and that means that we have the third largest amount of influence in the legislation. If we were to pull out, that legislation would cease to be fit for us here in the here in the UK. But we would have to obey the instructions, just like Norway does. Just we pay the fees and do the work and make our trade fit with what the European Union does without that input. I think it is absolutely vital that you have somebody like me in the European Parliament where I can work, where I can make the EU work for you, so that when you go out to work, you have an economy that is fit for your jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We're now going to move on to the Green Party candidate, which is Alex Phillips. The youngest councillor on Brighton and Hove City Council at 27, Alex is a secondary school teacher of French and German. Alex was elected to the City Council in a by-election in Goldsmith Ward in July 2009, winning the Green Party's first ever seat in Hove from the Conservatives, and was re-elected in 2011. So I'd like to hand over to Alex now, so a warm round of applause.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to you here today. I hope you don't mind, but I've got quite a lot of things I'd like to convey in the next 5 minutes, so I've prepared a bit of a speech here. My name is Alex Phillips, and as has just been introduced, I'm a councillor in Brighton and Hove, and I'm also second on our Green candidate European list for the European Parliament for the South East of England later this month. And in these next few minutes, I'd like to speak about why I feel the European Union matters to all of us, and why I think we need more Greens in the European Parliament to create a new Europe that's fit for the 21st century. Now, the EU was created after World War II, partly to maintain peace with its member states, and it has certainly succeeded in this goal. But the EU must do more than maintain peace to prove its worth in the 21st century. And Greens want to see an EU which is a force for the common good and fit for modern Europeans. The financial crisis is at the forefront of people's minds. The aftermath is all around us. Many families are struggling with the soaring costs of living, and more people are turning to food banks for help. But the Greens in Europe are fighting for a new kind of economy, an economy that invests in green jobs and protects our environment, an economy that serves the common good, not the wealthy few. Which is why Greens in Europe have introduced a cap on bankers' bonuses and fought for a financial transaction tax that would discourage risky deals in the city and at the same time raise money for our hospitals, schools and universities. It's clear the EU must clamp down on the gamblers in skyscrapers and stand up for millions of people across the continent who've suffered the consequences of their risk-taking. And a new Europe must focus on job creation. Youth unemployment is one of Europe's most pressing problems, with 20% of young adults in the UK currently jobless. In some EU countries, that figure is as high as 50%. But Greens are working hard to address youth unemployment across Europe. We have campaigned for things like a youth guarantee scheme, which secures every young person in the EU the right to be offered a job, an apprenticeship, additional training, or combined work and training after a maximum period of 4 months unemployment. And it's not just about jobs. Education is key to young people to discover and fully develop their talents. We believe that education is a public good. Costs should be borne by the public because people starting out in the working world with £55,000 worth of debt just is not acceptable, which is why Greens are campaigning to abolish tuition fees and reinstate the educational maintenance allowance. Greens recognise that with around 19 million students and 4,000 universities in the Union, education is also a European common good, so we are working in Europe to achieve a better range of higher education on offer across the Union to ensure genuine freedom of choice. Defend the wonderful Erasmus scheme. On the environment, the EU has driven positive change on many issues here in the UK, from protecting our lungs from air pollution to safeguarding our seas from overfishing. Indeed, on some issues, Britain simply cannot go it alone. EU countries share their seas and breathe the same air. Our birds don't need a passport to travel, and the sewage split on beaches in France doesn't disappear when currents carry it into the UK. When it comes to protecting the environment and regulate dodgy dealers in the City of London, it is clear that we need to be part of the EU. But I also recognise that the EU is far from perfect. Some crucial reforms must be made. A new Europe must become more democratic, more legitimate, and less of a vehicle for free trade. The EU must work for the common good of all, not for the vested interests of the wealthy few. But the EU won't become a force for the common good unless we have more politicians elected who are willing to steer it in the right direction. In Europe, Greens have a real say in lawmaking. With 58 MEPs from 16 different countries, our group is the fourth largest in the European Parliament. And I would argue, of course, the more Greens that you elect later this month, the better a chance we have of moving forwards towards the new Europe that we so desperately need. My vision for a properly accountable EU is one which puts the defence of human rights and protecting our environment and resources at its core. A Europe which works for people, not for big business. A new Europe must be our Europe, run by the people who live here and accountable to them. That's the Europe I want, and I hope you all do too. For me, the choice is stark at this election. People can vote for one of the establishment parties who offer different shades of business as usual. Or they can vote Green for the right kind of positive change that puts people and the environment first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on to our third speaker of the day, which is from the Labour Party, which is James Watkins. He grew up in Kent on the Isle of Thanet. James works in economic development and is a lecturer on public policy. He's also vice chair of the health charity Swanswell. James has worked as the head of an economic development unit, has been the chair of the Labour Housing Group. He worked in Parliament for Labour MPs and later was the political advisor to the Embassy of Japan in London. He also led work that contributed towards the establishment of the House of Commons all-party group on retail and business crime. So I'll hand over to James now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me today. You know, colleagues, Europe is about our daily lives, whether it's about having clean air in this city, whether it's about fighting drug peddling that happens across Southampton, whether it is about jobs and growth, which is absolutely vital for Hampshire and Southampton. Europe is at the heart of that approach. But you know, we need to be frank today. We can't pull out of Europe because it would hit our families, it would hit jobs, it would hit growth. But we do need to be honest to ourselves. Frankly, the Eurozone crisis has been a mess. And it has been a mess because the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives, have been in cahoots with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who have pushed for cuts and austerity instead of growth and jobs. And that is why we need change in Europe. We need a focus on jobs, a focus on growth, and a focus on people. Now, I know, colleagues, there will be many people in this room, some on this panel, who will say that Europe is about uncontrolled immigration. And we've heard this line time and time again. But the fact of the matter is, as we saw in last month's Metro, that just is not true. The Home Affairs Select Committee investigated the situation, and they found out there is not a rush of Romanians jumping on EasyJet to come to Southampton. The fact of the matter is that the Tories and UKIP and other fringe parties are frankly using the scare tactics to actually scare people off being involved in the European Union. And I think what we need to do is face in this debate today, Claire, we need to face those scare tactics and actually face the truth today. Now, Labour believes that we do need change. We do need change where we have a real focus on jobs and on growth. We need an EU budget that is focused purely on jobs. We need an EU commissioner whose sole job is to actually help with economic regeneration. And we also need to boost the role of our UK Parliament so they can scrutinise EU legislation in a more effective way moving forward. But we need a Europe that delivers for all of us in Southampton and Hampshire. We need a Europe of nation states working together. Now, before I finally end my comments, let me say a few words about the Ukraine. Now, in the Ukraine, we are facing a serious international crisis. A crisis where Russia is believing it can infringe upon another country's territorial integrity without a by your leave. And it's at this time of international crisis that we don't walk away and draw up the drawbridge. It's at this time that we work within the European Union, with our partners and with the United States to try and find a solution to that crisis. You know, I think about my mother, who was a child during the Second World War. She was evacuated from London when the bombs was raining down on London. And it was the European Union, because of the ability to bring different countries together, that ensured that we now have had peace in Europe for over 70 years. Because we know in this room that money talks. And when you have a close trading relationship, that helps countries to come together. That's why we've had peace in Europe. That's why we've had prosperity. But that's why we need change. So instead of the mistakes of the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats in terms of dealing with the Eurozone crisis in the European Parliament, what we need is a real focus on investing in people, investing in skills, and of course, investing in jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. And now on to Marta Andresen, who is an Argentinian-born Spanish accountant, employed in January 2002 by the European Commission as chief accountant, and notable for raising concerns about flaws in the Commission's accounting system, which she felt left the Commission vulnerable to potential fraud. She was subsequently elected as a member of the European Parliament for the United Kingdom Independence Party, UKIP, in 2009, and 15 months ago moved across to the Conservative Party. So I'd like to invite you to speak, and a warm round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As has been mentioned, I was not born a politician. I was born an accountant, a boring accountant, and a boring economist. But it happened that in 2002, I was recruited by the European Commission to become the chief accountant of the European Commission. I was going to be responsible for the EU budget, which today equates to 125 billion pounds. Serious amount of money. Now, when I joined the Commission, I was told by the now Lord Kinnock, at that time Commissioner responsible for reform, that the EU had undergone a very big reform and that the financial management was state of the art. So I felt very proud to be leading this team of people who had this very advanced administration. However, when I came in, it took me only 2 weeks to realize that there were serious shortcomings, not only in the accounts, but also in the systems through which we were making the payments. I had the intention to propose reforms because I thought many reforms were easy to make. And I designed a series of reforms which were just ignored by the commissioners. To make that story short, they didn't allow me to make reforms, but they put a lot of pressure on me to sign on accounts and payments that everybody, not only myself, everybody knew were wrong. I resisted the pressure and said I was not going to sign. And to make the story short, I was sacked. Obviously, in that period I was there, I learned a lot of things. And one of the things that I learned was that actually there was no interest in controlling where the funds were going. Because the European Union, let us say the European Union bureaucracy, because this is the people who have the power, were interested in giving the funds to those who would support the European Union project, the Federalist Europe project. And that was the issue. And I have to tell you, as time goes by, I have been vindicated more than once. I was vindicated by the European Court of Auditors, who have refused to clear how we spent the EU funds for the last 19 years. But I was also vindicated by the crisis, because a lot of money was given to Greece, to Spain, to Portugal, to Ireland, without asking any questions. And the money was not well spent. And these people went into severe crisis because instead of using these structural funds to grow their economies, to grow their infrastructure, they used it for other purposes. And that is one of the most important elements of the crisis. Not the only one, of course, and people will call on Goldman Sachs and whatever. I have to tell you also it was the Commission who called Goldman Sachs to give money, to inject money into Greece, so that it wouldn't be seen as a country that was not at the level of the others. Now, after this speech, I'm sure you will know that I am a withdrawalist, that I would like to leave the European Union. But I think that it has to be a democratic decision. I would think it would be the wrong decision for the UK to leave the European Union without giving everybody, you, your parents, your family, everybody, the ability to make a decision. And in this sense, I have to say that the Conservative Party that I now represent is the only party that is giving the people of the United Kingdom the possibility to decide. And that is why this election is so important. I used to be a member of the UK Independence Party. I worked hard for them. I was their treasurer first and then became their MP. But they don't actually have a strategy to leave the European Union. The only strategy is to put pressure on the Conservative Party. And that's very good. But if the Conservative Party decides not to accept the pressure, then we are not going to get out of the European Union. So we need to consider who is the party that can give us this possibility. And the Conservative Party will not only give us the possibility of a referendum, they will give us the possibility of a renegotiation. Because many of you may think, well, I actually don't want to leave the European Union. After you have heard from my colleagues, you may think, oh, we will lose jobs, we will lose trading agreements, we will lose a lot of things we have today. I will not scaremonger you. I don't think we will lose anything. I think this country can manage to recreate trading agreements and employment opportunities. One way or the other, we will get along. And the economy right now is growing, and it's thanks to a Conservative government. So what I'm asking you is that you give a thought to this, because these elections are quite important. A protest vote is a wasted vote, whatever you think about this, because there is so much that a government can balance, and they have to take into consideration both the side that wants to leave and the side that wants to stay. And in the side that wants to stay, there are big industries and big corporations who actually give you a lot of employment opportunities, so they cannot be disregarded. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martha. And now moving to my left, we have Steve Uncles from the English Democrats. Steve joined the English Democrats in 2003, shortly after its launch. At various times, he has held the offices of Membership Secretary, National Party Secretary, Operations Director, Communications Director, Events Director, and Campaign Director. Steve has held the position of South East Area Chairman since 2006. I was elected to his position in 2011. So I'd like you to introduce Steve with a round of applause. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Uncles, and I am the lead candidate for the English Democrats here in the European region of South East England. I'm an Englishman, being born in Blackheath, and that's now London, but historically Kent, and I've lived in South East London, North West Kent all of my life. I'm now 50, just like the city of Southampton. Congratulations, Southampton. 50 years as a city. And I'm English, I'm not British, and I'm not European. And that's now the flagship policy of the English Democrats, to achieve independence for England once again. Not only do we believe that the European Union is bad for England, but we also believe the United Kingdom is equally as bad for England. And we wish to see these choices put to the people of England through referendum at the earliest possible time. We are the only party that wishes to leave both unions, neither being of benefit to modern England in the 21st century. As I said, I'm English, not British, not European. And in the November 2006 ICM poll commissioned by the Sunday Telegraph, it showed that support for full English independence had reached a staggering 48% of those questioned. That was 8 years ago, and surprisingly, no similar poll has been carried out since. In 2011, the UK government census showed that 60% of people living in England gave their nationality as only English, with a further 10% claiming a dual identity of English/British. On the panel here today, then all but two parties here support the continuation of the United Kingdom. However, although we may disagree about Europe, it is good to see the Green Party agree in the self-determination of Scotland and are campaigning for Scottish independence and therefore an end to the United Kingdom. This will then free England. The British political establishment bizarrely feeds to the public and the media that if Scotland leaves the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that somehow the United Kingdom can continue. This is incorrect. If Scotland effectively divorced England, just like ending a marriage, the Union of 1787 will be dissolved, and the United Kingdom will also be dissolved. And it will be dissolved into its three component parts: the Kingdom of Scotland, the Province of Northern Ireland, and the Kingdom of England, which includes the Principality of Wales. Wales is a principality, Northern Ireland a province. It would therefore be foolish for the British politicians to believe that they could reunify England, Wales and Northern Ireland and call the entity the United Kingdom, when the remaining components of the former United Kingdom only contain one kingdom, that kingdom being England. The Labour Party is a very confused party. Their former deputy leader, John Prescott, born in Wales, once bizarrely stated there is no such nationality as English, indicating that the Labour Party believe that all those living in England identify as British. I'm English, not British, not European. And as previously stated, the 32 million people in 2011 in the quiet of their own home identified as English only on the national census. It just shows how foolish the British Labour Party are. Indeed, their current leader is running under the slogan One Nation. That must assume that Ed Miliband means One Nation of Britain. Remember, we are talking here about the British Labour Party, who in 1998 put in devolution to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Recent polls show that around 40% of the Scots plan to vote for yes in independence in this year's referendum on the 18th of September, and 45% currently intend to vote no. The momentum is with the yes campaign, and Alex Salmond is the best politician in the British Isles. It now looks likely that the 370-year union between Scotland and England as Great Britain will be broken up on the 18th of September. So if you wish to both leave the European Union and the union with Scotland, then vote English Democrats on the 26th of May. We are standing in every constituency in England. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Steve. I'm now going to hand over to Julian James from Your Voice. Now, this is a party that was only started in January. so don't be surprised if you haven't heard of them. A little bit of background about Julian is that he was in the Royal Navy. He's also been the founder of 2 information technology projects, including one that was an electrically powered propulsion system for light aircraft, according to LinkedIn, which is quite interesting, amongst other things. So I'll hand over now to introduce his party and his ideas a little bit better than I can, so thank you.
And now, as they say, for something completely different. Which of you voted in the 2009 European elections? Which of you was old enough to? There's a few people like that. Well, it won't come as much surprise that I was old enough to vote in the elections. But I'll let you into a secret. I was one of the 63% who were registered to vote in the South East, but who failed to do so. I didn't understand the importance of the European elections until very recently. As you might have gathered over the past few weeks, a proportion of our laws are made in Europe. What proportion this is? Well, that's up for debate. But I think it's agreed that if it's high enough, it's significant enough to be of importance to us all. So as it turns out, we should all be paying more attention. Those laws cover international trade, environment, agriculture, workers' rights, and much more. These areas of legislation have an impact on all of us. But it wasn't just ignorance that was stopping me from voting. I didn't feel that there was anyone who I could actually vote for. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the other parties didn't have anything of value to offer. It's, well, they didn't seem to represent me. So at the beginning of this year, I took some time out to think about what we really need from a democracy. A real alternative to the current system. An alternative in which we all have a say. The Your Voice alternative, where we empower ourselves. Okay, a quick question to you. A few weeks ago, I read a recent survey that found those aged under 32 in Europe spend on average 5 hours a day on the internet. I'm afraid I couldn't find the source when I went hunting for it this morning, but it sounds as though it could be pretty reasonable. So the question is, what is it that you're actually doing? Okay, so anyone want to give me any answers? Christ, you're a quiet audience today. Okay, so you're informing yourselves. You were communicating with each other, sharing your experiences, getting into discussions. You were using that flow of information to help you form an opinion. That opinion may be anything from which bar you're going to this evening, to who you want to vote for on The Voice. And for voicing that opinion, for letting others know what you want, you can vote online. But what if that opinion, the one that you've formed, is an opinion about issues that make a real difference to our lives? And obviously here I'm assuming that The Voice isn't the be-all and end-all in your lives. It'd be useful if I'd learned my script as well. For instance, what if you had formed an opinion about legislation passing through the European Parliament? How would you make your voice heard on that? Well, that's exactly the question that I asked myself in early January. So I formulated the Your Voice approach, one that I consider to have a great chance of delivering a better democracy. An approach that we can all believe in, an approach that we can trust. Your Voice only has one policy. That policy is that we should work together to empower the individual. Because we believe that given sufficient information and communication, we are all perfectly capable of making up our own minds. We just need a system that allows us to express our preferences. Your Voice will act as a facilitator, bridging the gap between you and the European Parliament. We'll present the legislation to you in an easy-to-digest form, providing views from those on all sides of the argument. You'll then be able to engage in our hosted discussions to help you form your opinion. Finally, we'll ask you to express that opinion via an online vote. As a Your Voice MEP, I will then cast my vote in the European Parliament, representing the choice that the Your Voice community has made. I want a democracy in which we all have a say. If we all vote for Your Voice, we can realise that ambition of a better democracy. So join us on the Your Voice website, yourvoiceparty.org.uk, or via a QR code that you can see on my jumper if it actually works. I've only just had it printed. Like, follow and share the message. Commit yourself to helping us to spread the word. Pledge your vote to Your Voice. But most of all, vote for us on the 22nd of May. Your Voice is your party. It's your chance to instigate real change. Together we can help Your Voice deliver a better democracy.
Thank you very much to Julian, and on to our final speaker of the afternoon for the formal presentations. So start thinking of your questions now, and I'll hand you over to Danny from the Socialist Party, who was an enigma on the internet to find out about your past, I have to say. So feel free to introduce yourself a little bit more in detail than I have. So thank you very much. Over to Danny.
Well, my name's Dan Lambert, and contrary to what somebody might have said about themselves, I don't disagree with. I'm a human being. Sorry? Oh, can you hear me? Do you not need to use the microphone? Yeah, that's fine. Right, I'm a human being. I'm not English, but I didn't choose to be born here. It was just a matter of chance. More about the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party was formed in 1904 with a declaration of principles and an object. The object is the establishment of a system of society where the means for producing and distributing wealth are owned and democratically controlled by and in the interest of the whole community. We live in a society called capitalism, and it runs for the benefit of the capitalists. I mean, that's why they call it capitalism. And it's based on the employment of wage labour. Now, if we look at the term employment, we can see that it means to use, to exploit, to take advantage of. And that's what our society does with working class people. We are used. We have to sell ourselves, our abilities, our social creativity on the labour market for a wage, salary or a fee. In fact, a price. And therefore, anything with a price cannot be free. Now, what the Socialist Party proposes is a system of society where we produce not to the profit of a few, but for the benefit of all, on the basis of from each according to ability, to each according to need. A society where we bring freely of our social creativity and take freely of social production. And all societies, I mean, I have to say first and foremost that, before I carry on, is that the Socialist Party is a revolutionary organisation. The object is a revolutionary object. So therefore we don't propose to reform or to advise our oppressors how to run capitalism. I mean, what we want to do is replace it with socialism. So I don't have any huge ideas to tell you about Europe, apart from the fact that it's just another way of socialist, capitalist oppressing working people. But all societies are social relationships. So it follows, the more we know about what we're relating with, the more we know about who we're relating to, the more functional, more human that society will be. So let's have a look at who we are. Well, look, as I said before, I'm a human being. I share the same ancestors with all of you. There's nobody on this planet more distantly related, according to the geneticists, than the 16th cousin. So there we are a human family. Now, in a family that functions as a family must, if it's to be a real family, yes, it is, the socialist watchword, from each according to ability, to each according to need. So we can see immediately why our society is so dysfunctional. It is driven by a case of mistaken identity. We are conditioned from birth to identify ourselves as English, Irish, Scots, Welsh, Iraqi, American, Pakistani, Indian, Palestinian, Israeli. And all these identities are spurious. They have no foundation in fact, they're inventions. They exist only in the imagination. What we are human beings. And until such times as to rediscover and acknowledge our common identity, then we will be driven by division. Because the great thing about having a common identity is that you cannot abuse, exploit, or take advantage in any way of those you identify with. All you can do is cooperate. Now, we human beings are so much better off when we cooperate. And of course, in a society where we bring according to our ability, take according to our need, a society where production is only carried out with use and not for profit, then there'll be no money involved. And when no money is involved, then we don't need banking, insurance, taxation, advertising, money, and debt collecting. We don't need the armed forces to defend this private property owned by the capitalist clubs. We don't need military industrial complexes. I mean, William Morris pointed out the century before last that it was more expensive to sell something than it is to make it. So therefore, I mean, today, if you have a look, it works out that to sell something is 70% more expensive, 7 times more expensive than it is to make. So therefore, with a society that's truly human, based on a human relationship as we really are, then we'll have the leisure to discover and the time to discover our potential, our personalities, our creativity, in the company of everybody else who's encouraged to do the same thing. Now, I mean, what I urge you to do is to go online, look up the social science, and have a real good look and see if you find something in it. Because that's what I'm here to do. In this stumbling clumsy way, I want you to actually figure out for yourself what's in your interest, so you can live for yourself and not for your employer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Danny. Just to explain why there's an empty chair on stage, is that we invited all political parties to come and speak today in the interest of freedom of speech, and there is a full party list of everyone running at the front, but we had some illnesses and some last minute cancellations, so we apologise for that, which is also why there is no one representing UKIP, which you may have been expecting, but he was ill this morning, so very understandably didn't want to infect the rest of us. So if you do want to collect a list, do head over and collect it from there. There's also a voter registration form, so if you haven't registered to vote, I'm going to keep reminding you throughout this afternoon, but please pick one up. You'll know if you're not registered, because by now you should have a voter registration card through your front door, which tells you where your registration point is on the 22nd of May. I'd also like to encourage you at this point to use the hashtag votes, Sutton Votes. Sorry, I nearly got it wrong. So hashtag Sutton Votes to join in a conversation with fellow people in the room, at home, that are reading the live blog that's going on from Wessex Scene, and hopefully tune in tomorrow at 1 o'clock when CCTV's broadcast goes online, so that you can watch back anything that's said today. And obviously, if you then come up with another question, I'm sure some of our panel will be happy to answer your questions. So to move on to the second half of this afternoon's hustings, now that we've given everyone on the stage a chance to speak and to explain themselves, we're going to head over to some questions. So I'm going to start off with one preset question and then go to the floor, and there'll be a roaming radio mic that's coming around amongst you, so if you can wait for that when I point to you, then please ask. We will allow questions that are party specific, but only if there are the interests of developing information or in investigating something new, not for point scoring and not for degrading or for any other antagonistic meanings, because that's not what we stand for as a students' union. We encourage healthy debate and not just victimising people. So I'll put it out there. And I'm going to start with a very broad, open-ended question for our panel, who each will have about 2 minutes to answer each, if that's okay. I'm not going to keep you too much time. Which is, how would, if the students in this room and the students watching at home and the students reading the blog were to vote for you on the 22nd of May, how would you actually implement any policies that would affect their life in the next months, weeks or years? So I'll start at the other end this time, I think, and start with Danny, if that's okay, if you could speak to the microphone. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd be really surprised for a start if you all voted for me. But as I said before, I mean, we're not here. We're not here. I mean, I'd love you to, but, you know, I mean, basically, you're trying to get through this conditioning that we all endure about what life is, who we are, how we should live, how we could live. what I would urge you to do is I would urge you to join our party. I mean, it's the most democratic party there is. We don't have leaders, we don't have secrets. When somebody joins our party, from the moment they join, they have as much democratic influence as any other member, no long standing. We also have a rule book that ensures the party is run by its members and not the other way around. So, I mean, that's what I would urge you to do. I mean, we don't want, I mean, we won't do anything for it as a party. What we want you to do is we want you to come and join us and help us change the mind of our fellow workers, so then, as a vast majority, we can have a revolutionary transformation of society to a really human society, where we live our lives for ourselves and not for those who pay our wages.
Well, hopefully from what I said earlier on, it's quite clear what we've been trying to do for you, and that is the script wasn't worth my writing at all, and I could have got away with getting through it without all that pain. But, in essence, your voice is going to give you the opportunity to have your voice. We will facilitate the process that allows you to communicate directly with the European Parliament. It will allow you to have your say on the legislation that's passing through, so that in the end, it's a community decision across the whole of the South East that gives you the control, empowers you as individuals.
I think there's two aspects of the current UK and the unfairness to the people of England that people are quite aware of. The first one is prescription charges, which does affect us all. But the one which particularly affects you as English students is the fact that you guys have to pay £9,000 a year to go to university, and it's free in Scotland and Wales. And it's free in Scotland and Wales not because they're more canny with the way they manage their money, but because of something called the Barnett formula, where they actually get more money. They get more money spent on them per capita than people do in England. And in a union which is meant to be a union of equals, I think that's discriminatory against the people of England. What's more, that legislation was brought in by a Labour government, and at the same time they imposed it on English students, they actually waived it for Scottish students with the Scottish devolved government at the same time. How hypocritical is that? Since then, we've then of course had the Conservative and Liberals in, and they haven't reversed it. I was lucky enough to go to university when I actually got a grant for going to university. My daughter is going to university this year, and I said she's going to have to pay £9,000 a year. So that's the one thing that the English Democrats will bang on and on and on again until it's right and fair for the English students.
I don't mind in what order you want to go, you don't have to stand up.
Work from the other end inwards again. It's an interesting fact that health issues are not a European issue. So if I'm re-elected, then I will work on European issues. The legislation that comes from, written by the Commission, comes from the agenda set by the heads of state or heads of government. And so I will take an active interest in all the legislation that comes forward and crawl over it for its impact on environmental, for the natural world. I actually sit on international trade, and when I was first got on that committee, very disappointed that I wasn't put onto the Environment Committee. But in fact, I realised you need environmentalists on every committee in the Parliament, because that's, international trade deals have a great impact on environmental issues. We were working on the Colombian Free Trade Agreement, and I managed to get a lot of environmental protection measures into the Free Trade Agreement. So that's my pledge to you. I will also continue to work to make sure that the trafficking of human beings from outside the European Union into the European Union and around inside the European Union is stamped on, that we give the police the tools, and that we have enough conventions that we can follow the people who traffic human beings and face those. The Parliament is a different way of working completely from Westminster. Every MEP there is able to amend and put our amendments down on legislation. Then we have to get coalitions, and we have to work with other MEPs in order to make sure that that amendment gets through. So it is very much a consensual Parliament where we work together. The third thing that I would then do is to report back. And I think that's very important. Every 5 years we come before you and say, please vote for us, but you need to know what I've been doing in the last 5 years and what I intend to do. So I have websites, I tweet, I have Facebook, I have articles in local newspapers, and I appear on the local radio. So you have that commitment for me. It's environment, it's trafficking, and reporting back to you.
Sorry, I thought we were going this way around. Okay. Well, 7 years ago I worked in the European Parliament for Caroline Lucas, who was the then Green MEP. She now represents Brighton in Westminster as our MP. And I worked on legislation around things like supermarkets, abuse of buying power, so that it's kind of like the Tescopoly sort of campaign, so that small local businesses have their powers strengthened and bigger monopolies don't just grow. Other interest areas for me are animal rights. I'm a vegan, and yeah, I think that in Europe there's lots of animal rights legislation. Obviously women's rights, and as someone who self-identifies as LGBT rights as well. So lots of sort of equality and human rights issues there. I think we need to protect and strengthen workers' rights and jobs, especially for young people coming out of school, coming out of university, and that's something that can happen in Europe too. And obviously the Green Party is the only party that actually opposes fracking. So it's great that a lot of environmental legislation comes through Europe, and that is why we need Greens in Europe, so that we can set renewable targets that are much higher than they would otherwise be. Because let's face it, it's us, it's our generation, you and I, who are going to be lumbered with the mess that previous generations will leave us with on environmental issues there. And on education, although obviously it isn't really, well, it's not at all a kind of a remit of the European Parliament. You are right that in the 60s, people got grants to go to university, and at that time the highest tax band was 95%. Today, we have students coming to university and being crippled by tuition fees, and that may be because the highest tax band today is 40%. So I think that we would see under the Greens in Parliament, not in the European Parliament, because it's not European Parliament legislation, we would see a vast increase in tax on the wealthy, and the lower down you are on the pay scale, the less tax that you would pay. Obviously, tuition fees were brought in under Labour, and they have been kept by the Lib Dems and the Tories, and none of those grey parties have said that they will get rid of tuition fees, which I think is appalling. One final thing is that obviously the Green Party wants to have a referendum on Europe, and we want to vigorously campaign to stay in Europe. And one of the things that kind of works for students is Erasmus. And when I was a student, I actually went to university in Paris for 4 years, and it was very handy having access to some of the benefits there that I might otherwise not have access to if we were not part of the European Union. And so I think that we are in Europe, we need to stay in Europe, we need to be a team player. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we organise a meeting? Would you like to make the answer?
Okay, let me answer your question correctly, Claire. The problem that we have in Europe is that the European Union has been dominated by the centre-right. It's been dominated by an approach where business owners, and we need to develop business growth and entrepreneurialism, but nonetheless business owners have had the whip hand over what we believe in the Labour Party, which is a social Europe. So you will hear from Marta and others comments such as European red tape. But what that means in reality is, should mothers be denied the right to be there with their children because you're going to cut maternity leave? Should dads be denied the right to be with their children because of cuts in paternity leave? Should it be the case that if you fall out with your boss on a Wednesday afternoon, you could lose your job? The fact of the matter is, in the European Union, we have to some extent, and not completely, the Labour Party wants it to be improved significantly, but to some extent, a level playing field that works to ensure that British workers are not undercut by workers from other countries. So what I would do, and what the Labour team in the European Parliament would do, is to push for a genuine social Europe. A social Europe that will bring people together. A social Europe that will not put the needs of profit before the needs of families. That's our fundamental issue in this election. But there is one final issue before my 2 minutes, Claire, ends. Catherine said earlier, in answer to the question, that in fact the European Parliament does not cover health issues. Well, let me give you one final commitment, and I'm glad this is going to be online. Let me give one final commitment, that in the negotiations for the EU-US trade deal, there is a possibility that there could be a clause that could lead to the backdoor privatisation of our National Health Service. So let me make this absolutely clear. Labour members of the European Parliament will vote against any clause that could lead to the outsourcing of our NHS. Thank you again.
And also the last answer to the question, Martin. Thank you for waiting patiently.
Okay, I will do for you what I have been doing up to now for the last 5 years, which is fight for British interests. Now, young people have specific interests, and I think what worries you more today is what your future is going to be and what employment opportunities you have. And it is true, in fact, I have been the Conservative Party, the right-wing parties have been fighting to cut on red tape. Because you need to understand that big corporations can cope with this because they have a lot of resources. But small businesses cannot cope with red tape. And this means that the employment possibilities are reduced. But they cannot cope with this legislation. They have to close down. And this means less job opportunities for you. So yes, it is very important to cut on red tape. But it's also very important to secure that investment goes to the right people for the right purpose. And today, if this economy, British economy and European economy is to grow, research plays a very important part. And I think you can play a very important role in research. This is the future. And this is what I'm going to fight for you, to see that a lot of the funding that we have to put into the European Union coffers goes to research, to develop the opportunities for you for the future. There are other things I could tell you, but you need to understand one thing. The areas where the European Union has competence are huge in my view, but do not cover issues as the NHS or even tuition fees. So don't start thinking that you can go vote and expect a lot of things. Fortunately, although I wouldn't like to have given so many powers to the European Union, fortunately we have kept some powers for us. And I wish we would be able to repatriate more powers to the United Kingdom, because we are able to make the decisions according to our own culture. There are different cultures in Europe, and we have to admit this. And a Spaniard, even if I'm one, does not think like a British person, and a French doesn't think like an Italian. So we need to admit this. And a one-size-fits-all, which is what the European Union wants to give us, a one-size-fits-all does not work. So what I'm going to continue to do is fight for your interest, fight for your employment. I have young children, older than you, and I also think of them when I do my job in the European Union. Thank you.
Excellent, and thank you for all the answers to my preset question. And now we're going to go to questions from the floor. If I can ask Sonia to come to the front and collect a microphone from just next to the table. Excellent. And do I see any hands in the air? Yes, the gentleman at the back is coming for us. Sorry, Sonia's going to come around. And if I can ask everyone asking a question to say their name first. It's just, well, it was, hang on. Oh, here we go. There's a room on there. Say your name first and then ask the question if it's directed to a party to make that clear. And I will use chair's discretion to outlaw any questions that I deem inappropriate. So, thank you.
Okay, so I'm Hector Hamilton. I'm doing MEng Electronic Engineering with Nanotechnology here. I'm in my I'm approaching the end of my second year now. I have a couple of important questions which I think they're pretty much for everyone. For example, June 6th last year, we learned from Edward Snowden that, in fact, all of us in Europe are subjects to this global US spying network, which is really infringing on our fundamental rights. We also learned to another extent that we're being. It's not just that the US that's doing it. We also have forces within our countries. All member states of the European Union have these forces that have attempted to impose mass surveillance on them. What are your opinions? What are you going to do to curtail this mass surveillance in the European Parliament, this mass surveillance which is infringing our fundamental rights? And there's a second question which
So just one question at a time, please, so that the panel can formulate, and just give everyone a chance, and if at the end there are no more questions, to go back. So just to reiterate the question, it was, what did the panel believe the European Parliament should do about surveillance, specifically to do with the USA and EU? And I'm happy for anyone to start, or if you'd like to stick to a specific order. Yeah, of course.
I'll give you a simple answer. I would like us to be able to protect ourselves from mass surveillance. I would not like to depend from the European Union. The European Union will come to an agreement and has partly come to an agreement with the US. And I don't agree that somebody would decide on our behalf. So I think this should be on our own power to decide. Thank you.
So thank you.
It is a very difficult issue, and it's an issue that's given us in the Parliament a lot of heartache and soul searching on how much do we allow freedom, because we want the internet to be free, we want people to have easy access and the freedoms that the internet brings, but we don't want to have our privacy invaded. And so there's a huge tension there on how we as legislators protect people's privacy at the same time as protecting their right to access to the internet. My colleague Sarah Ludford, who is the Lib Dem MEP from London, has done a terrific amount on that, protecting human rights. And the feeling is that people should be able to look at emails on a need to know. And there's very little need to know between chatter between people that are on the internet. We need to regulate from outside, and you will know that we rejected the ACTA legislation that was coming through very soon after the Lisbon Treaty, when we had the Parliament gave the right to reject legislation, to vote on that. And we rejected that, and the reason I supported the rejection is because we don't actually have a policy in the European Union about how we regulate data that travels across borders. And I think that is a really pressing thing that we must do in the European Parliament. And we will have a new commission in July. We will be interviewing all the new commissioners, and that is a question that we will really be pushing them on how they propose to bring forward legislation on the protection of your privacy at the same time as protecting your right to a free and open internet and social media and the like.
Excellent, thank you. And was anyone on the side? Yeah.
There's something very 1984 about the European Union. We have advocates here who tell us it's such a great thing, but I don't know about you, but I just don't think it gets very much coverage here in England through the BBC, and I don't really know what's going on there. There's a programme on the telly every day, the Daily Politics, with Andrew Neil. They never discuss the European Union or what's happening in the European Parliament. The other strange thing that happened was that somebody had to make a Freedom of Information request to the BBC to get to concede that actually the BBC get funded from the European Union. If the BBC is getting funded by the European Union to promote the European Union, then why don't we know more about it? Why don't we know what's going on there? Or is it just hush money to say, please keep this thing quiet so we can just get it going on so that nobody knows about it? Quite frankly, I think if it's such a good thing, then why isn't it given more publicity? Why don't we all know more about the European Union?
Thank you, Mr. James.
Thank you. Hector, thank you for your question. There is a legitimate concern about the mining of mass data, which was not known about before the Snowden revelations came out. And it was an unexpected development. Now, I understand the concerns of the police and others to protect our country from terrorism, and I don't decry for 1 minute the brave men and women who protect our country from terrorist threats. But I also agree with you, sir, that we cannot have a situation where we have an unbalanced situation where you can have mining of data without a by your leave. That's why I'm pleased that Labour MEP Claude Moraes has led in the European Parliament on a cross-party basis to work on this very issue, so we do have decent safeguards and we don't have the mining of information. But I'd just like to add one more thing to your question, Hector, if I may. It's not just the US NSA we need to think about. It wasn't long ago, just a few years ago, that construction firms here in Southampton, Hampshire and across the southeast were collecting data about people who wanted to work on construction sites, but because they were also members of a trade union, they were being unfairly blacklisted. Claude Moraes and Labour MEPs have worked within the European Parliament to clamp down on that form of data abuse.
Thank you. And anyone else? Yeah?
Thanks. Thank you, Hector. I think there is a balance between freedom and privacy, but I think this type of mass surveillance has seriously gone too far. The Greens in the European Parliament are part of a group that the Pirate Party is also part of, and so we're quite strong on digital rights and protecting them. We also work quite closely with the Open Rights Group, so we would be doing all that we can in the European Parliament to protect us on this sort of type of mass surveillance which we think is inappropriate and unnecessary.
And over to Daniel Julian. You don't have to ask if you don't want to.
Well, I'm going to kind of break a taboo here. I'm going to ask why. Why are they keeping such a close eye on this all the time? It's simple, really. Because politicians and those that govern us know where the power lies. And it lies with us, because we do all the work. So it's essential, as we're the providers of the, as we're the goose that lays the golden egg, they're very, very interested in what we're doing, what we're thinking, and how we're organising.
Sorry, the question, which is what the EU do to the EU to challenge such things as you've clearly outlined.
Well, I point out the reason why it was happening. It's what I'm doing now. It's because it's about control. I mean, as I say, we in society have all the power. We're never told this, but it's demonstrated in elections, like the one we're approaching, is that what capitalism needs, it needs a majority of working class people to go to the polls and to legitimise capitalism by voting for a candidate that upholds capitalism, that stands for capitalism. And so therefore, as I said before, we are the most powerful section of society. We have all the power because we do all the work, but therefore it's absolutely essential that they know what we're doing, what we're up to, and how we're organising. And as far as democracy goes, which is what we want as a society, I see a democratic society as a society where all socially relevant information is available to everybody. So in that case, we can all make an informed, educated choice of policy on issues and such.
Thank you. Over to Julian for the last answer to that question.
Obviously, the internet is the almost proposition. So in order for us to be able to deliver what we're suggesting, it's important that you feel that you can interact with your voice in privacy, with security, And so I suppose it's obvious that what we're going to be trying to do is ensure that you have the freedom to do exactly that without being impinged by surveillance.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions on the floor? I saw a hand over here earlier, so I'll go to first. All right. And I've noted those who have hands up, so don't worry.
So my name's David Wickham-Ratner, and my question's for everyone. So the EU covers a huge remit, but these elections are being dominated by the topics of immigration and national identity. Speaking as someone who is a second-generation immigrant, do you not think that we have more important and pressing issues to talk about, and what can be done to alter the current rhetoric from parties?
Excellent. So that was a fairly succinct question. So it's just to emphasise, how would you go about changing the rhetoric to move away from it being just about immigration, where there are so many things that the EU covers? Alex, would you like to go first?
Well, thanks for this question. I think it's really key to these elections. And I think that what we should not be doing is scapegoating immigrants, or actually, in fact, third generation, second generation, whoever, for problems that clearly they did not create. And who did create these problems that we've got in things like housing, jobs? Well, it's the 1%, it's the bankers, it's the rich people who are creaming it off whilst, we all struggle. And so, I think that really it's those issues around housing and around jobs that government after successive government have failed to properly deal with. And let's not forget that it was under Labour that inequality rose so much. And I think that my voice really in the European Parliament would add to the 58 Green MEPs that we've already got there, and it would really be around things like equality, because I think they're the sorts of issues around housing, around jobs, and access to those things equally that we really should be debating here. In terms of immigration per se, the Green Party stands out compared to all of the other parties, because what I am not going to do here is going to apologise for allowing people in previously, because our NHS would be on its knees if we did not have these so-called immigrants in our country, and I think that a lot of the rhetoric that certain political parties, in fact most of the grey parties, spout, as well as the media, is not helpful in a discussion about the real problems that this country faces. And the Green Party is the real alternative. And in Europe, if I can just end on this, your vote counts. Someone in this panel before said, don't have a protest vote in Europe. It doesn't count for anything. But let's not forget that every time you go to the polls, there's a different system that you're in. And for Europe, it's a proportional voting system. So it's under proportional representation, the D'Hondt system, which means that actually you don't have to vote tactically. You can have a protest vote. Let that protest vote be a positive protest vote, and vote for the Green Party to add on to we've already got one Green MEP in the South East region. We need 2.5% extra to get a second one in. Thank you.
Thank you. And Martha, did you want to go next, or was it James? Martha, then James?
Okay. I think the immigration issue is quite complicated, and I agree with you that it shouldn't dominate the debate. There is a much more important debate that is around the fact that the European Union has demonstrated in the last 5 years that it has failed. It has failed to resolve the crisis, and it has a good bit of responsibility on the crisis. And we need to work or look into what has brought this crisis. And if we really want to continue to belong to the European Union in the same terms as we are today, in different terms, or we just want to leave. And this is the information that you should be receiving to be able to make an informed decision. I think the immigration issue has been brought about by the UK Independence Party, which was the party I used to belong. And I'm sad to recognize that this was one of the reasons I left the party, because I thought that the numbers and the information used to convince people that the immigration is a serious issue were wrong, were not true. And trying to convince people with wrong information is dishonest. Now, and I cannot stand for this. Now, we need to understand also that there has been a period of time whereby immigrants have come in and out of this country without control. So this country needs to be able to control or have a list of the people who have come in, for how long, what they are doing, and when they are leaving, and what benefits they have. And this is information that is reasonable to have. Now, putting the house in order once it has been a mess for a decade or more is a very difficult thing to do. So we do not have to underestimate that the fact that there is a problem because immigration is not controlled, in the sense that we don't know who is here and why. But it shouldn't be the essence of the debate, and I agree completely with you. It's a shame.
Thank you. And over to James.
Well, thank you, Claire. Towards the end, I'll pick up on Alex's points about Labour, but let me answer your points about immigration. You know, frankly, what we are seeing is the politics of fear. We have seen the politics of fear dominating the political discourse. We have seen allegations made by UKIP, and I have to say, Marta, not yourself, but some of your Tory backbenchers in the House of Commons who are making scare stories which do not stand up to any scrutiny. And it is about fear. So, for example, when I went to one area, people didn't attack Eastern Europeans, they attacked the Gurkhas. These are people who serve for our country in the Falklands and other war zones. In another area I went to, not in Hampshire but elsewhere, people said, I'm fed up with too many outsiders coming here, there's too many Londoners coming into my town. The fact of the matter is this is about the politics of fear, and you have this every time there's an economic downturn. We're seeing this in Greece with Golden Dawn, we're seeing this in France with the rise of the Front National. Frankly, some of the dog whistle politics that we're hearing from UKIP and others is about fear. So how do we actually tackle that fear? How do we actually deal with it? We need a positive economic agenda for jobs and growth. That's what we need to do. There's several things we need to go forward on that. Number one, we need to recognise that the approach that the parties have taken, or the centre-right parties have taken in the European Parliament and in the Council of Ministers, has not worked. It has aggravated the Eurozone crisis, and it has hit jobs in Hampshire and Southampton. So we need an economic approach. Secondly, what we need to do is we need an approach where we have a level playing field in terms of employment opportunities. That means everybody has decent job rights. That's why today Ed Miliband has said he wants to crack down on recruitment agencies that is refusing to recruit from local areas. So the fact of the matter is we need an overall holistic approach, but finally, colleagues, what we need to do is actually expose this politics of fear. There is no basis, there is no factual basis to it, but we know that fear does drive votes. So what Labour is doing is day in and day out, my colleagues and I and Labour activists and Labour Party members are knocking on doors to expose this fear and actually put forward a positive vision of Britain staying in a reformed, positive Europe.
Thank you very much, James. And now Steve.
Yeah, I'd say it's not about fear. I'd say it's about two issues. One is about democracy, and the other one is about competence. Because in terms of democracy, then if we put to the people in these islands as to how many people do you want to live on these islands, and people say, well, we'd like to stop at 50 million or we want to go up to 100 million, then that then gives these people a mandate for mass immigration. Let's say that I'm wrong, and people do actually want to have mass immigration, they want to have 100 million people living in this country, then that's fine, I accept the democratic decision. Then it comes to competence. It comes to competence in terms of these parties here have done things like selling off playing school fields. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're going to invite people to this country to live, then they're going to need schools. So what's the point in setting off the playing fields so you can't extend schools? The other thing is they're closing hospitals. Again, if you put more people into this country, you need more hospitals. Third thing is roads. You know, why build 6-lane motorways when it's not double the cost to build 12-lane motorways? If they really want to pack as many people into this country as they do, then they're failing on competence because they're not planning, and we get all these scare stories, and we get people concerned because there's scarcity of resource. The scarcity of resource because they haven't planned properly. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate that the question is how to move away from talking about immigration with regards to the European election, and I'll go over to Catherine next.
Thank you. James is right. It is the politics of fear, and it's being used shamelessly to advance an agenda, an anti-European agenda. It's not an old trick. It's not a new trick. It's the old way of doing things, and we saw that in Europe in the 30s. Blame it on somebody else, somebody who can't actually answer back. Migration in Europe has been a huge benefit. The people that migrate are much more likely to be economically active. They're young people who are motivated to go somewhere else to better their lot. I could give you lots of figures here. 34% more likely to pay taxes. Less than 1% of all migrants into this country from the EU, less than 0.5% claim benefit. That's far less than one ward in Birmingham of British people. 1 in 7 migrants starts a small business, usually within the first year that they get here. We know how vital small businesses are for our economy and for employing young graduates, as you will be when you leave here. So how do we move away from the scare which they're using, which UKIP are using, just to frighten people about the European Union? It's been a huge benefit for us as part of the European Union that we can move around here, but you can also move anywhere in the European Union and work and do. And there are 2 million Brits already living and working in other parts of the European Union. So we can't run away from them. We have to face them down. We have to give them the truth, and we have to bust the lie that what they're doing is frightening people for an agenda that is something else, because they want to get out of the European Union. Actually, I don't think they do want to get out of the European Union. It's a means to an end, to get a nice job, to be an MEP, to not do any work when they're there. They don't turn up. Less than 40% of the time Farage has been there. He campaigned to reform the common fisheries policy. He was on the Fisheries Committee, and since 2009 he's turned up once, he put no amendment down and voted on nothing. That's how he campaigns. We heard this week, he doesn't want to be an MP because that's the only place he's going to pull out of the European Union is if he's working in Westminster. So he prefers to be there, but he will get elected because he's putting scare stories around. We have to face the truth. We need to demand from our newspapers, and Levison also said there's something to be answered to the scare stories that come out of newspapers. You need to see when scare stories are there to stand up and complain about it, to write to the newspapers, to write and do it. And we will not do that unless we together face down the racists and the xenophobes.
Thank you. And now over to Danny, who has been introduced.
Yeah, okay, we'll do a bit more why. Why do people immigrate? Well, they immigrate because they want to better their economic position. And today on Radio 4, just on a programme driving down here, and they were talking about how they identified bodies in the Arizona desert from Mexican immigrants who got lost in the desert or couldn't keep up and were left for dead. I mean, we've got people coming from North Africa, risking their lives, and many of them die on the journey across the Mediterranean to do exactly the same thing. Well, I think planet Earth is the home of all humans. And so these people are trying to escape poverty. So then we come to another why. Why the poor? I mean, the poor are poor because they don't own the means of producing wealth. The rich are rich because they do. Now, if we look at the wealth, if we look at the means of producing wealth, these means have been developed socially, collectively, throughout human history. So therefore, if these means have been developed socially and collectively throughout our history, they therefore should be socially and collectively owned to the benefit of everybody. But they're not. So therefore, and couple that with this. I mean, somebody please disagree with me on this. Let's cut through the bullshit and disagree with me on this. The natural and industrial resources of planet Earth are the common heritage of all humans. That's it. Now, what we can see, if we accept that all this that's going on, what these people here are doing is they're trying to prolong the propagation of a huge scam against us, the working people of this world, by denying us the control of the wealth of our society. Because we live in a society, I've got a stat, it's in my head, I can't lose it. It came out, it was on the internet, not so long ago, a month or so ago. 80 people own the same amount of wealth as the poorest 3.5 billion. Now, how can that be something? How can that be rational? How can that be a human situation? How can we thrive as human beings in a society that allows that to go? A huge case of mistaken identity. We are certainly not being true to ourselves if we allow something like this to carry on, to continue. And of course, if we're not true to ourselves, then we lay ourselves open to all kinds of mental problems, schizophrenia, neurosis, psychosis, all these kinds of things, because we have to be something other than we really truly are as human beings. We have to be servants. As Oscar Wilde said in his pamphlet, The Soul of Man Under Socialism, the great benefit that will come with the advent of socialism is nobody will have to live their life anyone other than themselves. We set ourselves to our employees, we have to live for them. And this is the whole thing. This is what we have. Poverty, this is why wars, mistaken identity. We fail to find. We don't just fail to find out who we are. We're kept from it by the society we live in. Thank you.
And lastly, over to Julian before we move on to our last round of questions.
You'll find that it's difficult for me to answer a lot of these questions because I've specifically written the Constitution such that I have to remain impartial on pretty much everything so that I can deliver to you an impartial opinion and allow you to make the decisions. So ultimately, it is my role to ensure that you are made aware of both sides of the argument. So it's my Constitution, I wrote it. I'm going to step-side it very slightly and say to you, in terms of European Union migration, I'm married to an Italian. My eldest daughter is Italian. And my wife's been here since 2000. So I have a personal interest in seeing the migration work. Obviously, it's not a politically sensitive thing. On the flip side, I have a cousin who has moved to Spain, who's British, moved to Spain, and is doing very well in business, his own business that he set up in Spain. And so I can see that the huge benefits that can be gained from migration through Europe. I think the question was, how can we move away from the immigration argument? I think the answer to that is information and education. I really believe, and that's what your voice is ultimately about, it's providing you with the information, not just pocketed, closeted. In fact, it would be in our remit to discuss all of these views with the people standing up here to make sure that you were fully informed in the way that you're becoming fully informed today, and more so that you can make your decision on what immigration really means to the UK and not just be driven by a few headlines from someone who is grabbing those headlines at this particular point in time.
Excellent, thank you very much. Right, I think we've got time for 2 questions, if the answers are kept snappy by the panel, if that's okay. I'm looking to you if that's all right. The gentleman in the blue jacket at the back has his hand up, and then if you could confer amongst yourselves, the 4 of you there, for the last question of the afternoon. Oh, is there a question? I'm afraid that I know that you're from a party, so I'm afraid that I am going to allow it to be from students. I'm really sorry. But do feel free to talk to the candidates afterwards, and we do have bloggers around, if that's okay. But as there are students in the room, I'm going to ask the students that, so.
Hi, my name's Matthew, and I was wondering, if Scotland vote yes to independence, would you campaign for their inclusion in the EU, and on what terms, as similar to what the UK has at the moment, or as a new succession country?
And who would like to yeah, Cathy?
It's easy, the rules are already set. New applicants countries have to comply with the Copenhagen criteria. They have to sign up to all the rules and regulations that we have in the Copenhagen criteria. They have to undertake to join the euro. They have to opt into all the Justice and Home Affairs opt-outs that the UK has got. They have to join all the other protocols that have already been signed. So all applicant countries have to do that. So it isn't a case of Scotland going in and saying, oh, the UK isn't in Schengen, isn't in Schengen, we don't want to be in Schengen either. They would have to be in Schengen, so the border would be at Berwick. Okay, so every time you go past Berwick, get your passport out, because that's what we have to do when I go to work. I have to travel with my passport. So it's already set down. The chances of them getting in within the next 2 years would be very small. It takes most countries, even those that comply, even Iceland, who was well down the route before they put the brakes on. It's still taken them an awful long time. So it would take Scotland a long time, in which case they would be in no man's land. And the final thing is the Spanish issue. There are Spain and other countries that have regions that would like to separate. And in order to be accepted as an applicant country and then a member, you have to have unanimity, so a unanimous vote in the Council of Ministers. And they ain't going to get that from Spain. So if Scotland does go alone, they're going to be alone for quite a long time.
I'm going to hand over to James.
Yeah, I'm afraid Catherine hasn't actually been listening, because there's two aspects here. One is, in terms of the Spanish issue, then there's the UN Directorate on Self-Determination of Nations. So basically, if a part of Spain wants to vote for a regional independence, of course they can do, and that's how Scotland's going. If Scotland goes away from England, then constitutionally it breaks the 1707 Union, and as I said earlier, it then completely disperses the United Kingdom. Legislation would have to be put in place, and then so England would also be out of the EU. So that's a good reason why we want Scotland to also vote for independence, because England comes out of the EU as well. Don't shake your head, you're in denial.
Catherine, do you have something quickly to say before we move on to James? Or so your mic wasn't quite up?
In international law, yes, Scotland has the right to self-determination, and the UK has said, well, let's go back to the Britain. There is a UK at the moment, and that has said we go back to the agreement that Scotland asked to join the UK when it was first formed. We have said now you have a referendum and then you vote, and that is in international fine. What we were talking about is whether they could then join the European Union, and that is a real problem. We would still be a member of the European Union, although somewhat smaller, but then Scotland would be on the outside.
Thank you, and if we can move on to James and keep the comments slightly more to yourself so everyone has the chance to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Matthew, let me say first of all that I think Jose Manuel Barroso has made the decision very, very clear indeed, that each member state, if they're a new member state, has to follow a particular approach before they can join the European Union. And what Alex Salmond is saying, that everything that Barroso is saying, everything that people in the European Parliament is saying is false, shows that frankly Alex Salmond is giving a false perspective to the Scottish people, and that is a fact. But you know what is helping Matthew, Alex Salmond? It's the Conservative and Unionist Party. That's their official name, the Conservative Unionist Party, but they are the same party that is advocating Britain should pull out of the European Union. And how is that helping the SNP? Alex Salmond is going around Scotland saying you can't stay in the European Union because David Cameron's Conservative Party wants Scotland out of the European Union. There's only one major national party that's undermining the union of the United Kingdom, and that's Marta's Conservative and Unionist Party. And clearly the same goes for UKIP. Now, I know there's somebody on the panel who wants to forget hundreds of years of British history as if that never happened. I can't frankly fathom that. Maybe you guys are better at me at working that one out. But the fact of the matter is that we are strong together, we are better together, and let's hope that the people of Scotland will decide on the 18th of September that we need to stay together in the UK.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Marta to respond to that, as there was quite a lot of comments, of course.
Well, firstly, I want to confirm a bit what Catherine has said. The Lisbon Treaty says that for a country that becomes independent or a region to be part of the EU, they have to reapply. And for this reapplication to be successful, there has to be unanimity. So, confirming what Catherine has said and responding to James, it's not the UK who's going to, or the English people who are going to stop Scotland from becoming a member of the European Union. There are many member states that have a similar problem. Spain is one. It has the Catalan region who wants to become independent. Italy has the northern part who wants to be independent. The Belgians have the whole country split. So if one country would be admitted once they become, one region would be admitted once they become independent, the rest would follow. So forget it. It's not going to happen. Now, in my view, I would hope that Scotland stays part of the United Kingdom. But I would also hope that together the United Kingdom leaves the European Union. So we don't have to make the decision. Thank you.
Have any of the other panelists got anything they'd like to add that isn't new information or different? Alex, and then to Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I just wanted to clarify the Green Party's position, Matthew, because it was mentioned earlier by Steve. Like, we want Scotland to have a referendum, and then we want them to decide upon that, and then whatever they decide, that's fair enough. If they decide that they are yes, then in terms of Europe, I personally think that they're better off in Europe than out of Europe, for exactly the same reasons that we're better off in Europe than out of Europe that I mentioned earlier, like protecting the environment, protecting human rights, and that sort of thing.
Excellent. And over to Daniel.
Well, I mean, this is nationalism. It's divisive. It's reinforcing this mistaken identity that infects our society. I mean, what the Scottish people will be voting for, but those who think of themselves as being Scottish, is they're going to vote for politicians who call themselves Scottish to administer their exploitation. It's really not a working class issue. The working class issue is to end exploitation.
Thank you. Julie Johnson?
There's only one thing I'd say. This isn't an argument that has a lot to do with the European elections that are coming up. So I understand why you might have opposed it, but it doesn't actually give us anything to answer with regard to these elections. In the same way as the in-out argument is fairly ambiguous, because ultimately it's not going to be for any of us around here to decide whether or not the UK stays in Europe or leaves Europe. It's going to be a decision that's made in Westminster and possibly given to us in a referendum at a future date. So again, I think it's a slight sidetrack question, to be honest.
Martin disagrees?
I disagree. There are Scottish MEP candidates, and these people obviously want to know what will happen if Scotland leaves the European Union, if they will have the ability to reapply and how easy it's going to be. So I think it has to do with the European elections, indeed.
Okay, and on to the last question from the group. Have you got a nominated speaker? Okay, if you could pass it forward, say your name and your question, and if I could ask for the panel to be finished at just before 5 so we can wrap up on time. That's all.
Cool, right, okay. My name's David, I'm a third year history and politics student, and my question actually taps into some of this rhetoric about protest votes that we've had so far. It's generally to the main three parties, so Lib Dem, Conservative and Labour. The Greens perhaps we want to tap in as well, that's fantastic. Basically, I'd like to know, I'm kind of in a position where normally I would vote for you, but as this is the European elections, you know, does it really matter that much? Is it really that important? You know, should I vote for a fringe party instead? That's kind of the viewpoint that I'm considering at the moment. Why should I? Why should I vote for you as one of the major parties? You know, why should, and I guess Green candidate, so why should I vote for you? As a minor party, as a minor influence, and I guess to what extent are you actually going to be a major influence that you would exercise on the European Parliament?
Okay, thank you. So, what I'm going to ask you to do in the pursuit of saving time is give one reason for any of the mainstream parties, or just the person to my right, to say why they should vote for you, for the people in the audience, and then I'll give the option to the left to say why people should use their vote and vote for your parties as well. And that'll be a nice summation before I finish off the afternoon. If that's okay, David?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With regards to not voting.
Okay. Thank you. And James, would you like to go first?
Yeah, if I may, Claire, I will follow your instruction, but I think, David, you were asking why does the EU election matter, say, compared to the general election, as well as why you should vote for one of us. The European Union election is generally about day-to-day life. Many of the basic employment rights that we all have comes from the European Union. Many of the fact that we do have clean air and clean beaches, again, comes from the European Union. The fact that when I was a child I didn't die by sucking my transformer because it was regulated by European Union law and you have consumer standards of toys, is because you have consumer standards across the whole of the European Union. So the fact of the matter is the European Union is very important, and what will happen after this election, I will be brief, I promise, Claire. What will happen after this election is there will be a vote in the European Parliament as to the shape of the next European Commission. Do we have a centre-right approach, which is this business as usual, which is leading to the rise of Golden Dawn in Greece and elsewhere? Or do we have a centre-left approach, which is about investment, a fiscal stimulus, jobs and growth? So I promise you, sir, there is a real choice at stake. And a real choice is, do you vote for one of the Liberal Democrats or the Conservatives, the coalition parties, in terms of actually having business as usual? Do you go for the Green Party, which has caused cuts and actually a complete mess in green-controlled Brighton? Or do you actually go for a true approach that has clear, unequivocal commitments that we need a social Europe first, second and third?
Okay, thank you, James. And who would like to go next? Oh, if it could be Marta, Alex, and then Catherine.
I think that you are young and should never issue a protest vote. Each time we have the ability or the choice, we are given the choice, we should exercise the choice with the aim of getting the right person in the position of power. If you waste this opportunity, you will never be able to claim afterwards, you know, I voted for this person and they didn't do what I wanted. If you want to have recourse, you need to exercise your vote with responsibility. Now, in this specific case, the European Union has changed a lot in the last 5 years, and I can assure you that it's going to change a lot in the next 5 years, because the crisis hasn't been resolved, and you will see countries leaving and countries coming in, and therefore the way the legislation is going to affect us is going to be much stronger if we are not able to leave the European Union or have a good renegotiation. Specifically, I would say that the Conservative Party is the only one who's going to give us a referendum where we can decide if we want to stay or leave, or we want to change the terms of membership. And if we lose this opportunity, if we don't allow the Conservative Party to come back to power after 2015, this referendum is not going to happen, because neither my colleagues sitting here nor my colleagues sitting to my right will give you a referendum. And you know one thing, the European Union has divided this country for a long time. It's time that we make a decision. It's time that we support the party that's going to give us a referendum. If we don't vote Conservative just to put a protest vote, and we don't get this referendum, we have lost an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I spoke earlier about it being proportional representation, so it's actually quite different because it's not first past the post, so every single vote counts. You have 10 MEPs in the South East region. Most of them are from the more traditional parties plus UKIP. We have one Green MEP, and as I said earlier, we need 2.5% extra to elect me to the European Parliament as well. We are the fourth largest party in the European Parliament. We have 58 members, so we have a lot of clout there. And since lots of the kind of social justice and environmental justice legislation comes from Europe, it seems quite natural to have Greens there, I think, too. And as a young representative, I think I offer you something quite different to everyone else on the panel. And this kind of harks back to what I said earlier. You know, in 50 years' time, when we're all still alive, and people are looking back to this time, and they're like, so what did you do? Like, what did you do? We're lumbered with all this mess now. What role did you take in that? If you can respond to your children and your grandchildren and say, do you know what? I voted Green. I contributed to something positive to happen, and I really went all the way and voted that way as well. I think that's a very positive thing to say to future generations. And just finally, I think, you know, you might want to know politically a little bit more about me. I joined the Labour Party when I was 16, but I left when I was 17 when Blair went to war in Iraq. And, you know, Labour voted for cuts to the welfare budget just recently. They pledged to match the Tory spending cuts. They won't back calls to renationalise railways. They oversaw a huge increase in inequality under their time of government, like I mentioned earlier. They introduced and refused to repeal tuition fees. They refused to fight dangerous fracking, and they took us into an illegal war in Iraq. Now, if that's what they have done here in national government, I know that I don't trust them in the European Parliament, and that's why I left them for a true left-wing voice, which I hope all of you will vote for later this month. Thank you.
I'm going to let Catherine speak, and then James will talk slightly.
Yeah. Can I just, before I just wind up with my last thing, you mentioned earlier that you need to register to vote by the 6th. European voters may already be on the electoral roll, but unless they have chosen to vote in this country, they won't be able to vote. So if you have friends of students who are European voters, even though they are on the electoral roll here, they still have to nominate to vote in this country. And that's really important. I just wanted to get that one in. We've heard it's a proportional representation, and the Liberals in the European Parliament hold the balance of power in that Parliament. It's something like 90% of all the legislation that was passed is only done so with the Liberals supporting it. So if we don't support it, chances are it doesn't get through. If you want to look at how people vote, go to the website Vote Watch. It's very good. It tells you exactly how all the MEPs have voted. What you want in the European Parliament, because we know it is so important, because it affects so many things that we all care about, you want MEPs that work for you. If you waste your vote on a protest vote, all you're going to do is feel good the next day, and then when the votes are counted, you might feel a bit disappointed. I don't suppose anybody can remember what the other fringe parties got last time. You need MEPs who are sitting around the table, in the arguments, in the votes, working on your behalf. Why? Because in the European Parliament we work, as we do in this country now, as do most countries in the world, work in a coalition. You need MEPs who are there and engaged. If the UKIPers get more, they don't turn up. So you're going to do your country a disservice, because Great Britain and the South East region will not get that voice around the table in the argument. And the reason it's so important is because our economy is just turning the corner. It is just beginning to work so that we are building more jobs. And if without those jobs, we mentioned Greece earlier, Greece is now turning the corner coming up, as is Ireland. And Italy and Spain have still got a way to go. But without the support of all the family of the European unions, those jobs will melt away, sure as eggs are eggs. So you need to be voting for people that will work for you, so that Europe works, so that you can work in jobs when you leave university.
Thank you. I'm going to give James a quick chance to retort and then close up.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to really answer Alex's point, so everybody hears the facts in the round. The Green Party, the European Parliament, voted against changes in the Posted Workers Directive. That Posted Workers Directive is absolutely key for helping low-paid people get decent rights. Labour voted for, UKIP voted against. Labour is fighting for a living wage. Here in Southampton, Labour has got a living wage. I know that the Students' Union is also fighting for a living wage. Councillor Kit Kat in Brighton, Green leader, forget about asking him about a living wage. The fact of the matter is that the Green Party talks left and acts right. There's only one choice in this election. If you want a social Europe, please vote Labour.
Very, very quickly, and then I'm going to allow the last few writers to have one sentence each.
Goes against things like that, it will be because they are not strong enough, because they don't go far enough for us, because we are the only left-wing party. Indeed, we have brought in a living wage in Brighton and Hove City Council, and that's been replicated. That has been replicated amongst a lot of the businesses in the area, and it's brought up people's wages by a huge amount every single month. So, I mean, it's unfortunate that I have to respond to James, and he wanted to respond to me on those points. It seems like we can't really cope with how Labour treated us all in the last government.
Okay, and I'm going to just move on at that point, on to just the last few parties. We'll just have a minute or so just to wrap up.
Okay, so 70% of the electorate didn't vote in the European elections last time, and out of that, the people did vote, and 25% of them did vote for the fringe parties. Why did they vote for the fringe parties in quotation marks? Well, that's because of the expenses scandal, because of things like Liberal Democrat Cyril Smith, because of the fact that we've had an MP for the Conservatives who just resigned because he was giving cash for questions. That's why these parties here, who get 99% of the TV coverage all of the time, that's why the electorate want to give them a really good kicking. So vote for anybody else apart from those three main parties.
I'm going to let Julian carry on. And, excuse me, gentlemen, but I'm going to allow Julian to speak as you've had your time. Thank you.
If you like the alternative perspective on democracy that Your Voice offers, then vote for Your Voice. There's people out there who are like me, who want to have more of a say, who want to have more control over what's going on. But if that isn't your bag, then vote Conservative, vote Labour, vote the Green Party. Just don't be one of the 63% of whom I was one in 2009, voting for no one. Vote with your convictions, vote with your heart, and vote what you believe in. And if it's one of these other parties, so be it. If it's for Your Voice, well, even better. But don't waste your vote.
And lastly of the afternoon, before we have to rush away, Danny.
Well, it's essential that, I mean, the vote was hard won by working people. So I urge you to vote for yourselves, to find an organisation that represents your ideas and what you want out of life. And if you can't, then I urge you still to go to the polling booth and spoil your ballot paper, right? None of the above. To register your protest that you reject all that you've been offered. And I mean, with all these other candidates here have one thing in common: they all support the capitalist method of production. Well, to run capitalism in the interest of working people like us, is to attempt to run an abattoir in the interest of the animals it slaughters. It can't be done, it never works. And we take the Greens in Germany, they make very little difference. Capitalism just runs one way, and that's in the interest of those that own the means of production. The Greens in Britain, it's exactly the same. Capitalism, as I say, runs one way, and that is the interest of capitalists, not us. So have a good day. Thank you.
Okay, so can I please ask for a big round of applause for everyone that's been sat so well. And I'd just like to implore the last few statements that were made about the importance of voting and to turn out to the polling booths. There are voter registration papers if you do need to fill them in. Please do notify. There's also a full list of all candidates. So you've heard about first, second, thirds, etc. So please find out. Candidates, if you need to leave, please feel free because we've run slightly over. I don't want you to miss any form of transport so you can get home because some of you travel by public transport. There's also publications that have been left around the room and also at the back on the bar, so please take time to read these. You have 3 weeks to make your vote count. This isn't the end, this isn't when you have to make your mind up. I do agree that there are things like Vote Match online, so do make sure that on the 22nd of May that you make an informed vote and that you turn out to your nearest polling station. We will be running minibuses from Susu to help you if you have lectures throughout the day. Obviously it runs from 7 AM until late at night, so hopefully at some point during that day you can find some time to go to a polling station. But we are making sure that there are no barriers to you participating in this election. So just to recap some of the things we've discussed across immigration, internet surveillance, Scotland and the EU, the importance of the EU and the European Parliament in general, protest votes. Make sure that you register by the 6th of May, and just once again thank you to all our candidates who are on stage with us. Thank you very much.